This is Mehul Mankad. In this module, we'll be talking about whole health management and the mind-body connection. What is the most complex computer ever created? What control system has 100 billion nodes and 100 trillion connections between them? If you answered the human brain, you would be right on. There's a huge difference between the brain and other organs of the body. When you lose some heart muscle after a heart attack, or when a surgeon takes out a piece of your colon in surgery, the rest of the organ still works, and you may be okay, but the brain is different. There's something amazing about how each part is assigned a specific task and how those parts connect to each other. It's no surprise that if you screw up one section, it can have effects throughout the whole system. When we think of the brain's job, we think of handling sensations, touch, smell, taste, hearing, and vision. We also think about moving arms and legs. We might think about human brains as being capable of more complicated jobs like creating and managing emotions, or calculating, or reading and writing. But what about other jobs? These are the thankless jobs that we take for granted but must be done every second of the day for us to survive. I'm talking about regulating sleep, managing alertness during the day, controlling blood sugar, regulating temperature, releasing hormones, governing blood pressure, sensing and reacting to pain, handling hunger, and the list goes on and on. What if something happens to one of these systems? Let's think a little bit about the demands that we put on our bodies in the modern world. In the ancient world, the demands were pretty straightforward. You'd be going about your business in the tribe and you'd see a threat on the horizon. Let's say a stampede of rhinos was coming. You'd gather up your stuff and move out of the way and the herd would pass. Then you'd keep going about your business because you knew the rhinos were gone. So the natural response to stress is the stress appears, you do something about it, you either flee or confront the stress, and then you return to rest. Unfortunately, that's not how our modern world works. Our bodies do a pretty terrible job deciding how important modern stresses are. So let's say your boss yells at you for a late report at work, and let's say your next employee competence review is a month away. Your body doesn't really have a different system for handling that sort of office stress than it does for handling a herd of rhinos. It uses the same stress response system. So in our current world, we're often hit by constant, chronic, and relatively minor stresses that just won't go away. I do want to separate these stresses from the traumatic stress that people might experience prior to developing PTSD. We're talking about something much more common here. And as these chronic stressors from everyday life build up, we develop a chronic stress response. And it affects our stress response system in the brain. And that system starts to break down. And when the brain starts to break down, it eventually shows effects all over the body. You could make a list of every organ system in the body and come up with stress-related illnesses from head to toe. Or you could come up with illnesses that may have their origin outside the brain but are made worse by an upset stress response system. Migraine headaches, high blood pressure, asthma, obesity, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, psoriasis, infertility, and countless other conditions are worsened when the brain is loaded with stress. Some folks call this the mind-body connection. We don't have time to talk about too many of these conditions, so I've just picked two for illustration purposes. We're going to take a closer look today at chronic pain and sleep. Let's start with chronic pain. In fact, let's get even a little bit more basic and just start with pain, the number one complaint of people who go to the doctor. Simply described, pain is physical suffering or discomfort. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? But there are two common types of pain. Nociceptive pain is the one that makes sense. It's the pain caused by recent injury. The injury causes immediate inflammation in that part of the body, and the pain itself starts pretty quickly and is pretty sharp. Both the inflammation and the pain are often relieved by over-the-counter painkillers like ibuprofen, and when the injury heals, the pain goes away. The trickier type of pain is neuropathic pain. For those of you watching who've got chronic back pain like me, do you ever wonder why painkillers don't work that well? It's because this sort of pain is very different from the pain caused by immediate injury. Sure, the pain may have started with a sudden response to an injury, but something else happened. The injury affected nerves in that part of the body and they got damaged. This sort of pain is usually chronic and dull, and over-the-counter pain medication doesn't work too well for it. A lot of what we know about medicine comes from military medicine. Many of the great advances in surgery that we take for granted, for example, come from doctors trying to help troops in the field. And the information doesn't just stop with surgery. Let's take a look back at what was learned about pain by a very observant doctor in World War II. Imagine it's 1944 and you're at the Battle of Anzio on the coast of Italy. American forces are trying to displace the Germans. The fighting is heavy and both sides are at a stalemate. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Beecher, an anesthesia doctor, made some very interesting observations, and those observations are still very relevant today. Beecher found that while he was taking care of wounded soldiers in the field, about 1 out of 5 required morphine, which was the strongest medicine for pain available at the time. When Beecher returned to the United States, he found that his civilian patients were complaining of pain much more frequently. He found that about 1 in 3 civilian patients required pain medications. Beecher concluded that attitude had a lot to do with a person's perception of pain. He thought that the troops had a very different idea about their injury than civilians. To a soldier, waking up in a field hospital with an injury meant that they had survived the battle, that they were not dead. It also meant that they'd be returning home alive. To a civilian, the same injury might mean that they'd be out of a job, disabled, or unable to do things that they enjoyed doing. Dr. Beecher's contribution may seem a bit simplistic now, but what he taught us was that context and meaning behind an injury meant a lot. Our modern understanding of pain is a bit more complex, but it certainly builds on Dr. Beecher's historic work. It's easiest to think about pain and stress as 2 interlocking circles that affect each other. Let's say someone is experiencing pain, and let's say the pain is the neuropathic kind, you know, the chronic kind of pain. Chronic pain can lead to avoidance of activity. This avoidance of activity can lead to weakness and stiffness in the joints supporting the painful area. Guess what happens when joints or muscles get weak? More pain. And more pain means more avoidance of activity. More avoidance of activity means more weakness and stiffness, and the cycle keeps going and going. On the other side of the model, pain can lead to a host of negative emotions, anger, anxiety, fear, or distress. These negative emotions hang around long enough to turn into depressed mood and possibly major depressive disorder. And depression increases a person's perception of pain. And that cycle keeps going round and round. We're not going to go into details about treatment of chronic pain, but the important things to remember are that the mind affects the body and the body affects the mind. And chronic pain is one of the best examples of this interaction. When you're talking to a veteran about their chronic pain, it's not a bad idea to inquire about their mental health. And if you're talking to them about their mental health, don't forget to think of them from the neck down as well. Let's shift gears and talk a bit about another crucial bodily function controlled by the brain: sleep. Sleep is not just one big event that occurs through the night. It has stages. There are actually 5 stages to sleep. Stages 1 and 2 are light sleep. Deeper stages are 3 and 4. It's those stages that provide the most restful experience at night. The 5th stage is dreaming, or REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement. It's actually most similar to being awake, but mysteriously, our bodies really need REM sleep in order to function well during the daytime. So put it all together. The deeper stages and REM stages are the ones that are the most important. Now, I'm sure you've heard of people going to the hospital to get a sleep study. Doctors can measure the amount of time a person spends in each of these stages and actually tell you whether you're getting enough restorative sleep or enough REM sleep. Of course, If you don't feel refreshed and energized when you wake up, that's probably your best clue. When doctors look at sleep that is poor quality, they look for a few things. One is that the person may not be getting enough deep sleep. For a variety of reasons, if the person's sleep never descends into the deeper stages, they will not feel as rested during the daytime. Similarly, their days will be affected if they don't spend enough time in REM sleep. How many hours of sleep did you get last night? How many hours do you think you need? I'm sure you'd agree with me that most Americans get less than the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. And most Americans actually view caffeine as a legitimate substitute for sleep. I want you to pause and think about that for a little bit. Could you get through your day without a single cup of coffee or other caffeinated beverage? If you can't, then you're probably sleep deprived. Poor sleep by itself can lead to a huge number of mental and physical problems. Psychologically, poor sleep can lead to feeling irritable, feeling overwhelmed, lacking interest, feeling sluggish, losing patience, skipping scheduled exercise, and increasing anxiety. On the physical side, poor sleep can lead to heart disease, irregular heartbeats, high blood pressure, stroke, diabetes, and obesity. And what about sleep quality? 7 out of 10 adults who report that they're stressed also report that they have trouble sleeping. And those same adults report that their trouble sleeping occurs most nights of the week. And kind of like our pain cycle, we can think of a similar one for sleep. In this case, we can use just one circle, not 2 circles like we did for chronic pain. Insomnia can worsen anxiety. Anxiety can turn into physical tension. Tension can lead to poor sleep habits and poor daytime habits. And people can end up relying on sleeping pills to fall asleep and caffeine or other stimulants to stay awake. Relying on these remedies further worsens overall sleep quality. As with the pain cycle, breaking the insomnia cycle is critical. The best solution is usually a multi-step solution. Trying to fix everything that's wrong with someone's sleep with one solution usually doesn't work. Regular exercise, diet modification, meditation, light exposure, and psychotherapy for insomnia, also called CBTI, are all approaches that can work together to improve an individual's sleep quality. As we talked about from the beginning, there are a long list of illnesses that are impacted by the mind-body connection. Getting a better handle on the interaction between these two sides of our bodies should help you as you advise your veterans as they seek to improve themselves.